What's up? Welcome back to the podcast. How are you today, Roston?
Pretty good. Yeah.
That's good. So, to start it off, since last week after you mentioned studies about breath rate, I have looked into nothing other than breath rate. I have found all of the sensors that track this, and I'm very intrigued by it. What were your thoughts as to the practicality of this?
From what I've heard, the sensors that are currently available aren't like that accurate. The ones that I think it's Jumbo Visma is using,
Hmm.
that one is like the one that that one's not released. So that's what I've
Yeah,
heard.
yeah, that's actually the one I've been looking at, and they're on pre-order now for $300.
Dang.
Yeah, sensors get more and more expensive. I actually started a live chat with one of their representatives to ask about the accuracy of it, because like you said, they used to not be very accurate. And she gave me in a roundabout answer answering my question that their strap should be over 97% accurate.
Dang.
Yeah, she said
You'll
that.
have to send me the link to get on that pre-order. So I've been
Yeah,
thinking
for
about this
sure.
a lot too.
Yeah. And to your point about the old ones not being accurate, the first product I found was an abomination. It was called it had the weirdest name, and it was on like all of the health news channels about how brilliant it was. And then all of the product photos were just their product photoshopped onto someone doing an activity on their chest, like clipped to their shirt. I'm like, this is not doing anything for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've heard. Like Garmin tries to estimate it just based off heart rate.
Hmm.
It's so inaccurate. Like, there's just no way. If it's not
Yeah,
measuring the actual expansion of your chest, then
yeah. And that was another thing that the company is Timeware that is now making the accurate one, and they not only measure your breath rate but also your tidal volume, which is what I was asking about the accuracy of the volume of each breath. They estimate they can track that within 90% accuracy, which in theory should mean that you're able to track a lot more than just the rate of your breath, but also the volume of your breath.
yeah,
In
yeah, that's
theory,
really
would
cool.
that make you able to take VO2 max tests at home?
I don't think so because VO2 max is measuring like the actual oxygen you're, I guess, consuming and then using, whereas this is just
Mm,
measuring breath rate, I guess.
mm,
I think. I don't know.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. That VO2 is measuring how efficiently you're using the oxygen, not just how much is actually in your lungs.
Yeah. Apparently, when they first started, this company, when they first started making these, it was originally like a just a shirt.
Yeah,
I was like, that would be pretty annoying to have to put that thing on every time.
yeah, for sure. Do you wear a base layer typically when you ride?
Only if it's cold.
Yeah, I never do, so I can't imagine wearing a base layer with things stuck to it under everything else.
Yeah.
The one thing I
Does
will say,
there,
yeah, go ahead.
does it measure like heart rate too, or no? Because I was
Yeah,
wondering, like, I don't want to ditch my heart rate strap.
yeah, the first picture I saw, the dude was putting it on around his stomach, so I thought you had to wear two different ones, but it does measure heart rate, and it even measures some running metrics like cadence and ground contact time. It also has a barometer, which is an interesting feature to measure altitude.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what that's for.
Maybe you would be able to use that to, yeah, just like track how you're breathing changes as you change altitudes or something. I don't know,
Yeah. With
but
the
I guess you'd be
release
able
of
to do
their
that normally.
yeah, with the release of the new strap, they're also going to be releasing a new software that is supposed to track a lot from this strap. And one interesting thing that they claim that they're able to estimate is the ratio of fuel use from fat to carbs based on your breath rate.
That sounds very sketch.
Yes, it does.
I felt
The little quote under the fuel use section on their website says, ventilation opens a window into the efficiency of our working muscles. And then it has a graph with ventilation threshold 1, balance point, ventilation threshold 2, and VO2 max, and then has lines drawn as to which fuel source you're using at which point.
so it's just gonna estimate it as like making an assumption based on the intensity. That makes more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like basically what you would estimate from power is that you're burning 100% carbs when you're above VO2 and you're burning fat, mostly fat in zone 2 and 3, and then the crossover is in zone 4 based on their little graph here. But also, I would assume that would be user dependent, so I wonder if they
Yeah,
have some way of calibrating that.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's gonna be really cool. I think like a lot of people have been talking about like continuous lactate monitoring. I cannot say that. And I feel like this is gonna be like just as valuable as that.
Yeah, especially since the UCI has already banned continuous lactate monitors, even though they don't exist. And this is not banned as of last week, but they are considering a ban on it at the.
Why?
I'm not sure.
That's so dumb.
Yeah, especially since things like core body temperature sensors and sweat sensors are explicitly allowed in their rulebook. Have you ever done
Weird. I
a
mean, it makes
sweat
it.
test or anything?
No, I haven't. I've wanted to, but I mean, I've done like the like weigh yourself and then go ride and then weigh yourself after. When I did that, it was actually pretty crazy. I'm pretty sure I did like a 3 hour ride. It was like a really hot day, but I did like a 3 hour ride. Drank, I want to say, like I drank a crazy amount during that because I wanted to like see what it would take to replenish 100%. And I drank like I want to say like 2 liters during that, which I mean, I guess isn't an insane amount, but it's a good amount. And then came home and was still like 3 pounds lighter. So I lost like 5% even with drinking. I think it
Yeah,
was like
that's
2 liters
crazy.
or something. So I think I'm a pretty heavy sweater, but I've never done like the test where it measures like the sodium. Have you?
I have not, but while I was looking for this breath rate monitor, I also came across a monitor that claims to do the like analysis of your electrolytes in real time. So rather than doing like an in the lab test type thing, it's a little patch that you put on your arm and it's supposed to measure your sweat rate and your electrolyte loss. I think it's just generic electrolyte. I don't think they do the analysis of like sodium to potassium to magnesium, but general electrolyte loss in real time so that you can replenish it.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah, no, those are like the ones I looked into, just like the ones you just stick on your skin. Then it like gets an estimate. But yeah,
That is also $130.
you could easily go broke if you just bought every piece of technology that's gonna help you get more data.
Yes, that brings me to core body temperature sensors. If you were to buy the breath rate strap and the clip-on core body temperature sensor and the stick-on sweat rate sensor, you would have over $700 worth of sensors attached to your body.
Yeah. Plus then a power meter. You add a power meter onto that, a Garmin
Yeah.
onto that. Like, hold,
Yeah. At which point would you consider it not worth it?
at which point for what?
Yeah, I guess that would be a different answer per metric. If power meters were an astronomical price, at which point would you not pay to have power metric?
Honestly, I've been getting a little annoyed with my power meter lately because I don't believe it sometimes. Like sometimes I feel like I should not be doing as much power as I am, and then sometimes I feel like I'm going fast. It's just not. So, and I've been using up heart rate a lot more in training the last little bit. So, if power meter was like 1,000 or more, I probably want it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good number for that, especially considering how cheap you can get heart rate straps now.
Yeah, but yeah, I
What?
think the breathing rate, I'm really excited about that. Like, I'm definitely buying it as soon as it comes out,
Yeah. If you
especially
get
if it's
on the
only
pre-order,
300.
it's 300, and if you get on the pre-order, you get their training insight software free for a year, which is usually $150.
Dang.
Yeah, pretty good deal. I
Oh,
think that's yeah, go ahead.
no, I don't know. I had nothing to say.
I think it's crazy at the rate in which technology and monitoring is advancing because I didn't buy my first power meter until like 2 years ago. And then at this point, we're already looking at things that are monitoring in real time how much we are sweating and how hot we are and how fast we're breathing.
Yeah,
Like
it is
things that
crazy.
things that people 10 years ago wouldn't have even thought.
Yeah,
But to the same point, I did find a study from 2005 that was looking at respiratory rate and respiratory threshold as an alternative to power threshold. So it was definitely a niche for a long time.
what did the study say?
I struggle to read studies because of all of the letters and numbers, but basically it was saying that they were using a general term of anaerobic threshold of which in theory I guess is supposed to be your heart rate threshold where all of your LT based on power and heart rate, and they were saying that it was more accurate to measure, or it was quicker to measure with respiratory rate because of the decrease in lag. They were seeing that they did a test to a lactate threshold test, and the respiratory got to the estimated, like, if I'm understanding this right. I read it for like an hour and still don't understand. They did a test with heart rate and respiratory rate with a prior knowledge of the athlete's lactate threshold, and the respiratory rate got to the lactate threshold more consistently than the heart rate,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah, no, I
basically
mean,
what all of the studies.
yeah. I feel like have you ever done like threshold intervals and like towards the end, like you're breathing super hard, but then you look
Mm,
down at your heart rate and it's not that high?
yeah,
Or like if you get fatigued. Like I did a workout the other day where I did like some VO2 at the start and then a VO2 effort at the end of like a 5 hour ride. And I was like, by the end of that, like full gas on the last effort, like full gas, like breathing at my max, and then look down at heart rate, and it's like 185 just from the fatigue. So like breathing rate in that situation would have been a lot more accurate.
yeah, for sure. There was another. It wasn't a study. It was more of an article looking at two different studies, but it was diving into how respiratory rate could be used not only as a metric for determining performance, but for as a psychological aspect of knowing your body better because you could more easily correlate RPE to a objective metric, which
Yeah,
would be beneficial for pacing strategies if you were able to, in the moment, quantify how hard you were actually going based on RPE.
yeah, that makes
But
sense.
that's with the assumption that you don't already have a monitor that's just telling you what your respiratory rate is. Because in that situation, you don't even theoretically need to know your RPE. That should pretty much be telling you your RPE.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's other mental factors that go into RPE, not just breathing rate, but breathing rate seems to be accepted as way more accurate than any other metric.
yeah, for sure. That's why I'm excited about it. Like I feel like there's like the whole debate on power versus heart rate, and then like you bring RPE into the conversation, and it just gets like confusing sometimes. But in theory, breathing rate should like kind of just become like the gold standard from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, because it's almost like power is too objective because a watt is a watt all the time unless your power meter is wrong. But then RPE is so subjective that like even having a different definition of what RPE means to you can result in a completely different like 1 out of 10 score. So it's hard to quantify from person to person. Like
Yeah,
I know
for sure.
for me when I leave my little RPE score on training peaks after every ride, I pretty much always put a 3 if it's an endurance ride, just because that's what I'm supposed to put. But sometimes, like, if I'm having a really bad day, realistically, like, maybe it was an 8 and that was close to all I could do because I was getting sick or something, but for some reason I just always put a 3.
Yeah, yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about because it's like you don't want to like if it's harder, like if it's easier, I'll usually put it easier, but if it's harder, like it gets in your head, you're like, oh, like am I getting slower? Like
Yeah.
this was a 3 last time and now it feels like a 4 or a 5. I don't want to put that. So it is super, yeah, hard. I just
Yeah.
thought of one thing with the breathing rate. It might be hard to like I feel like as soon as you think about your breathing, you
Mm,
almost always change
you
it.
change it. Yeah.
So yeah, so I feel like with the breathing strap, it's gonna like you're gonna have to like learn how to like not think about it so that you're not having that like influence on it.
Yes. There was also another study that I read that I understood much better because there were far fewer numbers and letters. And it was looking into voluntary breathing and if that was better. And their method was super simple. They did 2 tests and they had one person breathe intentionally thinking about breathing in and out, and one person.
Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder for the person who was supposed to breathe intentionally, I wonder if they were like, hey, you need to breathe intentionally for this. And then I wonder if that affected it. Because like someone told me to go do an interval breathing unintentionally, I would be thinking about it and not and breathing intentionally.
Yeah. They had a control and someone that was slow breathing and someone that was fast breathing. And I thought
Mm.
that the breaths they were using were like very out of the range of what I normally do. Like this the slow breathing person was breathing 4 to 10 breaths per minute, which is really slow for
Oh, so they were like not, they were just doing like a endurance effort then.
yeah, it wasn't anything towards threshold.
That makes a little bit more sense. Because
Hmm.
like on my endurance rides, I notice like I like pay attention to it. I can usually like take some deep breaths and make my heart rate go down,
Yeah, same
but
here.
not so much during efforts.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting idea of like, are you gonna have to train yourself on how to actually accurately use this new metric? Because I think to a certain extent, the heart rate monitoring has kind of the same concept in that if you're looking at it, if you're on an endurance ride, you want it to be lower, and if it's higher than you want it, you're like I start like like you said, taking some deep breaths to lower it. And I'm wondering like if I'm doing the same power output, but I'm just taking a deep breath to lower my heart rate, what is that actually changing? Like, am I going easier at that point, even though my power is the same? Or was I doing the same thing the whole time because my respiratory rate and RPE was always the same?
Yeah, that is a good question.
Yeah, something I'm sure there's someone can answer.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume it wouldn't change like the actual like intensity or like blood lactate, for example, since
Mm-hmm.
that's like more like yeah, physiological. You can't really change that.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
that's def
guess
go
I
ahead.
guess on this topic of like metrics, what metrics what metrics do you actually use? Because there's obviously like a million
Yeah.
metrics that you can look at. So like what metrics do you use? And then what metrics are you like, yeah, this is useless.
Yeah, so on my actual screen I use every time I ride, I have distance, time, power, and heart rate, and the time of day, just so I know what time it is. And I think really anything more than that for a normal endurance ride is too much for me. And then when I'm doing a workout, the only two things I have on there is how long is left on the current interval and a little gauge to tell me if I'm in my zone. I don't want to know anything else when I'm doing a workout. But then a big one that I really like in races is the Climb Pro feature where it pops up the little screen and tells you like how much is left of your on the climb you're on. And it's I don't think it's very accurate, but it's accurate enough to help you pace a climb in a race, which I appreciate. What
Yeah,
about you? What do you normally?
yeah, pretty much same as you, I guess. Yeah, on like a normal just endurance ride, probably just power and heart rate. And I have like a couple different screens. I usually don't like to look at time or some on endurance rides, sometimes even power, just heart rate. So then I'll literally just have heart rate just to make sure I'm not going too hard. Um, Sometimes I'll even power off. I'll put my Garmin in battery
Mm-hmm.
save mode,
Yep, I
so
do the same thing.
I'm not looking. Yeah, and then I'll just glance down every once in a while. I actually need to start doing that again because I think I got a little too focused on power recently. But yeah, then in races, yeah, probably just well, in races I don't even look at it. Maybe just like distance to like know where the feed zones are at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and then intervals like power, lap power, heart rate, and cadence.
Yeah. Do you have your Garmin set up to ever give you an automatic split? I have mine set up that every 5 miles it'll give me a split and pop up with a screen that tells me my average heart rate and normalized power for the last 5 miles, just so I have an idea of what I'm pacing like.
No, I've never really done that. I've tried to set it up for like in oh, you can do it. Yeah, like when I've done like 24-hour races, I've tried to set it up to where it automatically laps every however long the course is.
Mm,
But it usually like gets slightly off because like on the course they might say it's like 16 miles and then it's really like 16.2 and then by the end of 24 hours it's way off.
yeah.
So that's the only
Yeah.
time I've ever used that.
I wonder if that could be a feature they could add because I know with the track running feature on Garmin watches, it'll auto lap your track laps if you want it to. So I'd imagine that's something they could come up with where it would automatically split your laps
Mm,
based on your start and finish time. or
Yeah.
start and finish location. Yeah, I like the battery saving mode as well, especially since when you have that on, it still will turn your screen back on when you have turn alerts, or for me, when those 5 mile alerts go off. So I can still know how I'm pacing, but not have to look at it the whole time.
Yeah. I just hate it when you're like out riding, like, and you're just constantly looking down at it, and then halfway through your ride, you realize you haven't like even looked like at the views or anything. You've just been staring at your Garmin.
Yeah, for sure. That's not a good feeling. I always put mine in sleep mode when I'm riding with someone else too, because
Hmm.
that's just more fun to ride with someone and not care too much, especially if you're not perfectly matched in fitness. Like going a little under or over your endurance pace might
Yeah.
mess you up a little bit for the next day, but in the grand scheme of things, at some point we have to let go of our perfect training at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
What are so do you look at any metrics for recovery like HRV or resting heart rate or anything?
Um, I've recently been measuring HRV with like just every morning with my heart rate strap in an app, and it's not seemed to be too accurate. Like last week, um, I did a big weekend. It was like a eight, or it scales out on a 1 to 10, like 10 being fully recovered. Every day was like an 8 or a 10, except for the day after my recovery day when it should have been the highest. So yeah, I don't really buy into HRV too much from my experience with that. But yeah, I do look at resting heart rate, but I won't really like change anything unless it's way off. Like if it's like 10 beats higher all of a sudden, which pretty much only happens if I'm getting sick, then I'll
Yeah.
like pay attention to that. But yeah, the main one is just like feeling like I think I think you can like forget to pay attention to how you feel by
Yeah.
like becoming too obsessed over all these metrics.
Yeah. I think that's a good point because sometimes if I wake up and don't feel like going on a ride, I'll try and like gaslight myself into thinking that I'm good by looking at my metrics when I know that they're not that accurate because my HRV has been in the same range both on recovery weeks and on weeks for the past year and a half. It's just been at the same number, and I'm like, there's no way that if this metric is telling me what you say it's telling me, that that's how where it should be. One metric that I used to have a Whoop strap, and one metric that that gave me that I thought was very interesting and seemed to be fairly accurate was skin temperature, which is really niche, but it would always tell me that I was getting sick like 2 days before I actually got sick, which I thought was really, it was like scary accurate. And I've been wondering lately if that skin temperature metric have anything to, could tell you anything about like your readiness, because in theory it should be a marker of like how well your body is regulating core body temperature. Like if I had a really hard interval day and my core temperature just never came down, I would imagine that would mean I wasn't very recovered.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's interesting. I've definitely noticed that like after an interval session, like you just feel like kind of hot and like your heart rate's high all day, and then even like going to bed, like if you do an interval session like late at night, like you almost always sleep terrible and like feel super hot and can't get cool enough.
Yeah. Do you have a Garmin watch?
Yeah, I have like a super old one that I have to
Does it
charge like every 3 days.
does it give you the body battery and stress score?
Yeah, but I take it off. I just wear it to sleep, literally just to get
Hmm.
resting heart rate. That's the only thing I care about. Um,
Yeah.
all the other metrics I do not care about.
Yeah. So the body battery thing, I think that's just useless and not accurate, especially since it doesn't go below 5 just because people were upset that they thought they were dying if it went below 5. But the stress score, I think, is actually pretty insightful. You can have it give you a graph for your day, and for me, it's almost always pretty accurately correlated with like how I'm feeling throughout the day. For instance, I did a ride yesterday in the morning, and then for about an hour after that, my stress is like pegged to the ceiling while I'm recovering. But then by like 3 in the afternoon, it's like trended down, which is like exactly how I was feeling. Like you said, that hot feeling after you're done, like it seems to go down with that stress score. And I have no idea how they're calculating that, but I think it's pretty
Mm.
insightful.
How do you use that? Like, what do you like? What that like? How is it making you train or recover better? I guess does
I
it,
think
or do you just like looking at it?
mostly the second one, but one thing it did make me notice was that idea of you said like going to not doing interval sessions too close to bed because I was noticing that it also gives you the stress graph through the night, and if I was doing intervals after like 6 in the evening, then it would say that my sleep was terrible and that my stress was like super high all the way through the night and just never came down, which was how I felt in the morning, so that makes a little bit of sense. Again, I have no idea how they're calculating it, and Garmin has always not been very transparent with how they calculate metrics. So, but that's really the only change I've made based on that graph was realizing I definitely shouldn't do intervals in the evening.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess one other like the something I've been paying attention to a lot more recently for like recovery is just yeah, like I said, resting heart rate, but more than that, a heart rate like on the bike and looking at like one of the things I look for during a recovery week is like a higher heart rate towards the end of that. In fact, like I'm taking recovery week right now and like I probably won't start training until like I get on the bike and like see like 140 heart rate for my usual endurance power. Um, and then yeah, looking at that and then like I've had a couple times this year where like get on the bike and heart rate just isn't getting up and then I'll just turn around, go home because I'm super fatigued or whatever. So that's one thing I've been paying more attention to that I think is pretty useful.
Yeah, for me, the first time I ever noticed that was actually my recovery week last week. Before that, like, you looked at my a few of my power files from races before and commented on how much cardiac drift I would have in those races, and that's something that's just recently I feel like it changed. I feel like I can actually do my endurance power now and my heart rate stays low. And then I did notice that
Mhm.
at the end of the recovery week it seemed way higher. So that's insightful for me personally to know that's something that you look at.
Yeah, yeah, especially like also like on the top end, like I did some intervals where my max is 200 and I was doing VO2 and or I guess I did a VO2 and a threshold, but yeah, heart rate was just like 10, 15 beats lower than normal and I had kind of been feeling a little fatigued. And so that was like one of the things I looked at that was like, yeah, I'm fatigued. I need a serious recovery week.
Yeah, I wonder what like if we're gonna dive into this changing our training to breath, like I wonder what that would look like. Like, would our breath rate be changing based on our fatigue? I would imagine it would if they're saying that it's basically like in this giving you a really good objective RPE measurement. So I wonder what that change would look like from fatigued on week to rest week, and if that would give you even more accurate than heart rate.
Yeah, I think so. From what I've heard, it should be like it will change, like it will like breathing rate goes up during a ride while you're getting fatigued. Like you can notice this, like if you go out, do a long ride and like hold a steady power output, heart rate usually goes up, and then breathing rate also goes up as well. but then heart rate isn't perfect because like if you're fatigued, then it might not go up, but breathing rate should, so it should be more accurate. And then, like I was saying with like the heart rate suppression, like it would be useful for like stage races maybe, where like and like for like Grand Tour riders where their heart rate's going to get super low, so it's not really useful anymore. But then breathing rate could be more useful. But yeah,
Yeah, that's definitely interesting to think about how, like, in those extreme circumstances where you're seeing these Grand Tour riders with resting heart rates, like, scary low, this, like, getting a whole new metric must be pretty insightful, like you said, because it basically becomes unusable when it's so low, because the only time it's low is when you're or that low is when you're actually in those stage races. So then you don't even have like
yeah,
anything else to compare it to.
yeah, sure,
It's definitely an interesting thing to think of. One thing I was also thinking about was how our bodies use excess oxygen not only during the workout but also for a few hours after the workout, which is kind of what I've been seeing with that stress metric from Garmin, but I wonder if this could give you a way more accurate like after ride recovery score, because Garmin wearables have like a recovery beats thing where you are supposed to start it right after you finish a run. It's only a feature on wearables. You're supposed to start it like right after, and then it gives you like this is how many beats per minute your heart rate went down in a minute. But that seems like a really short amount of time to measure recovery in, and I wonder like if you were to keep this breath rate strap on for 2 hours after an interval session, like what you would see with your recovery there.
yeah, yeah. That definitely could be interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure how it like would work after the ride up. That's not something I've looked into too much, but yeah, definitely could be interesting.
Yeah, I remember Garmin posted something about how your body uses excess oxygen after, and how they were estimating that, and I'm like, but that's so inaccurate. You're giving us science and then expecting us to trust your wacky estimations for this actual science.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of metrics out there, like we were talking about with our edges, that are not just useless, but completely inaccurate and misleading.
yeah, yeah, and
Especially,
like yeah,
the newer, I have a newer edge, and it gives me stamina scores and like tells me theoretically how much further I could ride at a given pace, and I frequently get it down to 0 more miles with like 2 hours left in my ride.
it's crazy. Yeah, there's so many useless metrics. Like yeah, it's kind of annoying. Like not only with the Garmin, but with like everything else.
Yeah.
Like there's a million metrics you could look at, and probably like there's like a million metrics, and then there's probably like five of them that are actually useful.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the problem is most of them use like some sort of algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
So like one of the like quotes I heard, I don't know where I heard this, but someone said like all algorithms are wrong, just some are useful.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting idea. I remember that a while ago you were asking us if we used any sort of FTP estimation. Do you still look at anything like that?
yeah. Yeah, so I have like Exert, which estimates it actually uses like more critical power, but they call it FTP for some reason. I usually find like whatever Exert estimates is usually like 10 or 20 watts higher than where my FTP probably actually is, which would align with like critical power, like WKO5, which is like a software you can link with Training Peaks. It also gives you an estimate which seems a little more accurate. But yeah, I don't really like change my FTP based on those unless I see like a big increase, then maybe I look at it and then like consider doing an actual test or something. But yeah, also like I think it's kind of just like a, I don't know, like I'm kind of over trying to get like a perfect FTP measurement all the time just because I like don't know how useful it really is, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. That's something I've been thinking about too, is like I haven't taken any sort of test in months and just been, I think my coach upped my FTP like 5 watts in between blocks, and we just assume that it's close enough because, like, when you're in the workout, we've done these workouts enough times to kind of just know, like, this is supposed to feel like this, and the numbers are roughly aligning with these ranges, so must be close enough. I think that's probably why we give such big ranges to power zones, because like you could tell someone that they're supposed to hold 247 watts for 8 minutes or whatever, but like that's not realistic, and I feel like it's way less helpful than telling someone to hold somewhere in this range and just get the most out of it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. One of the things I like the way I approach my threshold intervals this season is um yeah, I'd have that power range. So I'd have kind of a power target and then like I would start and like kind of just adjust based on how it felt, and then I also gave myself a heart rate cap, 185, which is my threshold heart rate. So I just said I'm basically going to do the most power I can without going over this heart rate. Um, and like maybe adjusting a little bit to RPE as well. That's kind of how I've approached it rather than like trying to hit a super specific number.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about using a heart rate cap like that. When I'm doing intervals, I don't even look at heart rate, which probably isn't the best protocol, but I just try and stay in the range. I usually aim for the bottom of the range at the start, and then if I'm feeling good, I'll move up to the middle or the top of the range just based on RPE and the mindset of like, I have a lot more this week and not completely emptying the tank.
Yeah, for sure.
It's definitely a struggle to like find where you're doing as much as you can, but also retaining the longevity of not burning out or peaking before your race. But that can also be a mental struggle when you feel like you're not doing enough. Like if you've got a big race coming up and you're holding back a little bit so that you can peak then, but you feel like you could be doing so much more beneficial work now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's like with my intervals this season, I would say my intervals have been like the easiest they've ever been, just in terms of like the quantity and then like the way I'm actually executing them. Like for example, the heart rate cap is like one of the ways I kind of limit myself, but then also just like the actual intervals have been like pretty minimal, I would say, like throughout the base season, like whether or not I was doing like one or two intervals per week, they were like not like I wasn't thinking like what's the most I can do today. I was just thinking more like what's the minimum I need to do to see an improvement. And I feel like that like accumulated over time has like worked better for me. And then I think like leading into Sea Otter, I definitely pushed a little harder and like maybe did like yeah, just like pushed the intervals a little bit closer to max. And yeah, I think that was both good and bad because that prepared me well for that race. But then yeah, well, I guess we'll see how it affects the rest of the season. It's probably not a big difference, but I would
Yeah.
say that's like one of the biggest things I've changed this season that I feel like has helped a ton is just like more of like the idea of the minimum effective dose rather than the maximum you can do without overdoing it.
Yeah, that's definitely a different mindset from where I was like 2 years ago, where I was going out and smashing every ride before I had a coach. And I think that that philosophy is still around in some people, which can be beneficial for maybe a very short period of time and have some really big short gains, but in the long run, like you're not gonna last destroying your body week after week after week. What
Yeah, for sure.
what specifically are you doing leading into Unbound since we've only got 4 weeks left before that? There's not much more time to do anything massive, but what have you been up to?
Yeah, after Seattle, I took some rest, and yeah, then I had a 2 week block planned, but I think there was a little bit of a cumulative fatigue lingering in like the month leading into Seattle. Um, so I started a block, did a big week last week, and then this week was supposed to be another big week. But I was just like feeling a little off, and so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna take a recovery week rather than risking it. So I just right now I've been resting, and then I'll have kind of, yeah, still 3 weeks to do just like some sharpening since I haven't done much of really any like VO2 work this season. That will kind of be the main focus once I feel like 100% recovered.
Yeah, that's pretty much the opposite of my philosophy, which is interesting because you're doing the 100, which will definitely be a way more intense race, but I did the whole reverse periodization thing this year. So I basically just did everything backwards. So at this point, I've been doing big tempo days. So we'll see how that turns out doing everything backwards than how I've done it in the past. But the idea was that I'd just put out more tempo power right before than doing VO2 work right before for a 200-mile race where if I'm in VO2 I did something wrong. It's
Yeah,
definitely interesting that there's so many different completely different training methods for different distances of races, and it's cool to see how they both play out.
yeah. I'm a fan of the VO2 like before a big race just because I feel like it gets you to peak effectively, but then it's also less specific. So there's kind of pros and cons to both. Like I feel
Yeah.
like from a pure like physiological perspective, like the standard periodization might be better, but like I guess it doesn't really matter how good your physiology is if you're not used to the actual race demands. So
Yeah, that's
it's interesting for sure.
when I was first looking into doing the whole reverse periodization thing, that's pretty much what I found was that standard periodization and reverse periodization were had negligible differences in studies, but that the standard periodization did lead to higher increases in LT2. But ultimately, what I decided is that I wasn't really looking for increases in that LT2, but rather better muscular endurance in that tempo range, which was hard to wrestle with the fact that, like, I might not be seeing objective gains in higher numbers, but I would most likely be seeing gains in how long I could hold the lower numbers.
Yeah, no, that actually makes a lot more sense. Because yeah, it's like that makes a lot more sense that you would do reverse periodization for like that scenario. But like for me, it's like the exact opposite. Like that tempo, like durability, like muscle endurance is like my biggest strength. So like I find yeah, like I don't have a ton of room to improve that. I just need like a bigger engine essentially. So like you said, a bigger like LT2 essentially. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it makes actually now that you said that, it makes a lot of sense that you would be doing reverse periodization and I would be doing standard.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I hope it plays out for both of us, and I hope that it played out for Nina today. I wonder if she's finished
Yeah.
yet. Let's see if there's some results up here.
What time is it there?
I don't know, but I know they started like 2 hours after I went to bed last night. So I thought about just staying up to watch the beginning of the live stream because they do some good live streaming over there. They started at 7 a.m. Girona time, which is 6 hours forward from Eastern time, so 8 hours forward from you. So they started at 1 in the morning, maybe? I can't do math very well. Doesn't look like they have any results up yet. We'll hope she finished and is recovering well. Well, yeah, that was a good talk. You have any other closing notes?
Yeah, you are being like super laggy.
Okay. Well,
Uh,
that's
yeah, I can't really understand what you're saying. I just hear words every once in a while. So that might be a good place to end it.
uh-huh, for sure. Yep. I'll just end it now. Thanks for joining.